Hey everybody, Ryan here at Etrailer. Today on our 2023 Jeep Wrangler 4xe, we're going to be showing you how to install the Redarc Tow Pro Elite Trailer Brake Controller. And we're going to be doing that in conjunction with the Etrailer.com Universal Brake Controller Install Kit, as well as the Universal Stoplight Switch made by Roadmaster. But before we get into all that, why don't you just take a minute, check this out, and make sure it's going to be the right brake controller for you. So you got your Jeep all set up and you're ready to pull your trailer around. And if that trailer has brakes on it, you're going to need a way to apply those trailer brakes. That way you're not just relying on the Jeep to do all the braking. And that's where a trailer brake controller like our Redarc is going to come into play. So this is going to work for those trailers that have 1 to 3 axles. So that's going to cover all your bases in regards to what the Jeep can actually pull. It's going to work with electric brakes as well as those trailers that have electric over hydraulic. Whenever you go to put a trailer brake controller in, things can get somewhat confusing. You know, there's so many different options out there, and Redarc is one you really can't go wrong with. They're super reliable and are becoming more and more popular. At least we've been putting a lot of them in the past few years. And really, I feel like that's in part to the appearance of it, right? So this is the only thing you're going to be able to see, this little knob here. And compared to the traditional style ones that I call them, they're more boxy and they kind of sit up in here and take up some leg room, which is important in the Jeep. You know, they're relatively compact, so this will definitely free up some space and has a really clean appearance. It's user-friendly too. You know, the adjustments you can make are quick and easy. This particular brake controller does have a proportional mode, and that's what majority of you are going to find yourselves using, and that's just a type of braking that it's going to provide to our trailer. And so with proportional, more or less what that means is however hard you apply the brake pedal and the Jeep, that's how hard the trailer brakes are going to come on. And so that usually makes for a little more of a smooth ride. You know, everything's kind of stopping as one unit. And so to kind of give an example that if you're going down the road, maybe a stop sign up ahead, kind of halfway on the brake pedal, you know, trailer brakes are going to match it. On the other hand, if you're going fast, you need to come to an emergency stop and stand on that brake pedal, the trailer's going to do the same thing. So just makes it a little more predictable. You're going to have some adjustability too, so you can dial the knob down from 0 to 10, and more or less, you know, you can do that to accommodate the size of the load that you're hauling. So let's say if you got an empty trailer, don't need a whole lot of braking action, you can dial it down, and then when you're fully loaded up, you know, you can always crank it up a little bit higher and you know, make those tweaks. That holds true too, you know, if you're going up big hills or something, you can always change that up a little bit. And you know, when you do apply the brake, you can see it changes to red, and kind of just a visual there on your braking intensity. You can also manually override it, so if you just push down on it, you can see that changing color and applying brake force. So you'd use that in the event of a sway, typically sway situation. If your trailer starts to catch wind or get away from you a little bit, you know, you can just kind of feather the power out to it, and applying its brakes and getting it all straightened back out. You can also change the brake controller into what Redarc calls user control mode. And I feel like that's important for a Jeep, because a lot of people go off-roading and outlanding and kind of camping off the grid. And that's generally when you'd want to use user control mode. And so to put it in there, so you can see we have a blue light. That means we're proportional mode. If you rotate the knob all the way counterclockwise, push your brake down, and push the button down twice, within 2 seconds it turns green. And so more or less what this is going to do now, you can dial your knob up. The higher the number, the more braking force, and it's going to send out a predetermined braking force to your trailer, regardless if you're barely on the brake in the Jeep or you got it matted down to the ground. So if you got a a heavy trailer and you're on dirt or something, you might not always be, you know, having your Jeep's brake pedal all the way down. You're just kind of, you know, riding it to let you down that hill slowly or something. But you want the trailer to stay true as well and not be pushing you around. So that's where this would come into play. And it's one of those things that you can, you know, change. kind of play with it a little bit and find out what works best for you. Something pretty cool with this setup too is this is going to have a park brake feature. So more or less, if it sees that you're stationary for a certain amount of time, it will apply the trailer brakes in a different manner or not even apply them at all. Because sometimes when you're just sitting there with your foot on the brake at a red light or something, you don't need all this braking force to keep your trailer, you know, from moving on you. So I think that's a pretty cool feature. You know, it doesn't use up your trailer brakes and wear them down when it don't necessarily have to. So that's pretty cool. And something else I want to mention, there's 2 of these brake controllers available, and they're going to be identical with one exception. One of them will come with a Tekonsha adapter plug. So Tekonsha is another brand of brake controller, and they make trailer wiring and things like that. And so if you happen to have, a lot of times Tekonsha will make kind of all-in-one wiring kits for brake controllers. If you happen to have a kit like that, this is where this would come into play because it's kind of just plug and play. Or maybe if you already have a Tekonsha brake controller installed and you kind of want to upgrade to this, get that kit because it'll come with the connector plug, make it real easy. It'll plug in and connect to your Redarc. Other than that though, you know, at the end of the day, a really cool brake controller. You know, you can do a lot of different things with it and looks awesome. So can't really ask for too much more, right? As far as the installation goes, on this vehicle, I'm not gonna lie, it's relatively, I wouldn't say complicated, but definitely time consuming. And that's because, you know, you just have to set up a lot of things. If you don't already have a 4-way flat wiring, you're gonna need to grab that. We use the Tekonsha kit with our universal brake controller install kit. So you gotta run some wires up, set up a few things. And then with these Jeeps, you need to use a stoplight switch as well to acquire a brake signal for the brake controller to work. So there's a few parts and pieces there. My advice would be, you know, think everything through. If you can run some of the wires at the same time and things like that, it should save you some time. And hopefully what we did kind of gets you going in the right direction and makes it a little bit easier on you. But if you'd like to stick around, we'll go ahead and get started on it now. To begin our installation, we'll be here at the back of our Jeep, and very first thing that I did was just take the included bracket to the self-tapping screws and secure it to the metal crossbeam under here. Gives us a good spot to mount it up. And then we can take the connector plug here, and there's a couple things that I'm going to do to it to kind of prep it, so to speak, before we put it in place. First things first, the yellow wire that's coming off the back of this, we're not going to be using it. It's for the reverse light circuit. You don't need to use it in our application. If you do, that's where it would go. It's the reverse light circuit. Then if you look at other wires, we'll have a white one with the ring terminal. That's going to be ground. A black one, which will be our auxiliary power, and the blue, which will be our electric brake. I'm going to change the end out. So they come pre-attached with these style butt connectors. I like to use the heat shrinks just because the ends seal up and, you know, provide a little more secure connection, I guess, if you will, or watertight. But the other ones will work fine. Just tape them up good if you use them. But when upgrading or changing over to these, you can strip back that insulation, give the wire a twist, place a butt connector over it, and crimp it down. And this is how all of our connections are going to be made, with the butt connectors and ring terminals and things like that. So let's make sure you get it nice and tight. And then this cap here, this 4-way, I'm going to cut that dust cover off because this is going to plug into our existing 4-way, and really no need to have that cover there. But with it set up a little bit better now, we can go ahead and get it in place. Feed all the wires through, like so. This one will come back around. I get placed into that little cutout there. And then we'll bolt this up. I'm just going to take a screw, feed that through, and then a flat washer, a split lock washer, and a nut. So I'll use that same combination for our other 3 attachment points. Got our connector plug secured, and then we can take our 4-way flat, and that's going to plug into our existing 4-way flat. If you need one of these, this is a Tekonsha kit we put on our Jeep. Worked out real well. But I am going to take some dielectric grease and put it on the terminals. This will help keep it protected against corrosion and things like that. So pile that up on there, and then this will just essentially just plug right in. So I went ahead, put some electrical tape on our connection there and a zip tie around it just to make it semi-permanent. And we can start to hook up our wires. So you'll get a big bundle of this duplex wiring, all right? And if you just carefully kind of cut that gray sheathing back, that'll expose 2 wires inside. One will be white, one will be black. The black one, you just hook up to the black wire coming from our 7-way connector, like we talked about, using the butt connector. And same thing for this wire. So we'll take our blue and connect that to the white duplex wire. Get it crimped down, and since I opted to use these heat shrinks, I'll come back with my heat gun and seal up the ends. Point we can secure our ground wire, so just taking the included screw, and we'll go right here on the bottom of our crossbar. What I've also done is just kind of took our wiring, bundled it up, and zip tied it up out of the way. Now we can route our duplex wiring from the back here up into the front. And when you do this, you want to avoid any hot and moving parts. So I just run it up along through here. And you can use some zip ties along the way to secure it. All right, so it runs up. It's going to just continue straight. And kind of see a piece of it there. But right here in this area, there's a big hole in the frame. And what I did is put a piece of wire loom over it and fed the wire into the frame where we can continue to route it all the way up to the front. So about here in this area is where our wires are to go into the frame. You can just push it forward, and every now and again you're able to reach in and grab it and kind of zip tie it. So it just runs up along through there. You can kind of see a little piece of it there. And just run straight. And in a little bit, I'll come back and put some wire loom on this and zip tie it up and whatnot. But our wire runs straight up into the engine compartment. It's pretty wide open up there, so usually if you kind of just push it up, you're able to reach from the top down, grab it, and pull it into place. In the engine compartment, here's where our wiring comes up, and at this point you can completely remove that sheath, the gray sheath, exposing the black and white wire completely. Black one will run over to the passenger side, which we'll get to in a moment. The white one, though, you need to run inside of the inside of our Jeep. And so in this corner here, there's a grommet that's not used, so you can drill a small hole through it and take the white wire and push it all the way through to the inside. On the inside, here's where our white wire came through, and there's quite a bit of extra length left to it. And so I cut it to length, you know, have some to work with. And this eventually is going to get connected to the electric brake output for our brake controller, but we're also going to need to have a power wire that runs inside of here too. And so I took the remaining length of white wire that we cut off of that and ran it through that same grommet into the engine compartment, which will eventually get over to the battery. I do suggest doing something different to one of the wires, that way you can keep track of them. So our power wire, I just tied a little knot in it. You know, I'll cut off, you can put a piece of tape or something. That way it's just easy to remember what wire does what whenever it comes to that point to hook up. We're gonna have the white wire that we ran back out into the compartment, and then the black wire that, you know, came from the wiring that we ran up here. So both of those are gonna run along the firewall here. I just have them loosely routed. There's some other wires that are going on right here. Don't worry about those. Those are just for other accessories we're gonna be adding in the future. So we just kind of ran everything at the same time, save some time, but concept same here. So does this run along over near the battery. Our wires are going to run over to our breakers, which are these here, which I've mounted up to a bracket. Not a ton of good places to go with these. I mean, there's some options. You want them close to the battery if you can. So I just took a piece of metal about that long, bent it, and used one of the existing bolts right here just to clamp it on there and mount up the breakers. So we have our 20 amp breaker and a 40 amp breaker. And depending on what brake controller you're using, you know, because the kit does come with the 30 amp as well. Check the instructions, see what the brake controller recommends. Generally speaking, a 20 and the 40 is fine. So what we got here, the white wire that goes inside of our cab, that gets hooked up to the 20 amp breaker. And so on the ends, you know, you crimp on these small ring terminals. The black wire, this is coming from our gray sheathing, you know, all the way from the back. That's going to get hooked up to the 40 amp breaker. And you're going to want to hook both of those up to the silver posts. All right. So you carefully remove the nut, slide it over, and we'll tighten this down. You want to have these tight before we set everything else up. So I'm just using a 3/8 socket to snug these up. All right, and then we'll have some leftover wire. You know, you'll be able to cut the black wire to length for our breaker. We had quite a bit of it. So you're gonna make 2 more wires, okay, with small ring terminals. You're gonna put those on the gold colored posts on our breakers. And these are just gonna run right over to our battery. So I got those wires running right up through here to where we can connect it on our battery post. So the only nut on ours from the factory was this one here in the middle. You can always take that off and put these over that stud and tighten that nut back down, but since we have unused posts, I prefer to use those. I did have to get a nut though. This is an M8 by 1.25 thread pitch if that's something you want to do. But I already got something else hooked up to it here, our modulite wiring from before that we installed, so I'll pull that off. Those ends, like I said, I put on ring terminals. These are a little bit bigger though, so the ones you're going to use. And just get them in place here, about like that. Take the nut and tighten it back down. So now back inside of our Jeep, we can take our Redarc adapter plug and get this hooked up. So the white wire coming off of it, the adapter plug, that's going to be ground. So I crimped on a ring terminal, and we'll find a ground in a minute. Red one will be your brake signal, which we have yet to acquire. So we'll get that sorted in a moment. But the other 2 wires, we can get hooked up. So the blue wire from the adapter plug, that's electric brake output. So that's hooked up to the white wire coming in through the firewall. That goes to the back of our 7-way. And then the other white wire, this is the power wire. If you remember, I put that knot in it. Keep in mind, this will be hot. You know, since we have the breakers hooked up, so just be deliberate. You know, it has power, you don't want to short anything out. So we'll go ahead and we'll kind of cut that to length there and get it hooked up. And this is going to go to the black wire on our brake controller plug. So just like the other connections, we'll slide that in and get it crimped out. To make things easier to see and work with, and since we're going to be mounting up our brake controller on this panel anyway, we're just going to remove it. So you can just carefully kind of pull out on that. And these are just some snaps that are holding it in place. It usually comes out fairly easy. And see, like I lost one of the white pieces there. If that happens, not a big deal. Just go ahead and clip that back into place. But yeah, we'll go ahead and get this out of the way for now. I pushed our ground wire kind of up and through the opening here, and it turns out there's a good thick piece of steel right here with the factory bolt in it. I'm just going to use that as my ground. So I'm going to pull this out with a 10 millimeter. Just slide the ring terminal right on it and tighten it back down. So I got our red wire hooked up from our connector plug there, and this has to get connected to a brake light signal. And so with the Jeep, you can't just tie right into the factory harness, so to speak. And so I had to use a universal brake light switch. It's made by Roadmaster. It zip ties onto the brake pedal arm, and when you push the brake down, if you set it up right, it'll send power out. And that's what I tied into there. So that's what this little blue wire is from that switch. And yeah, and I'm doing other, accessories on this vehicle that's going to require that signal too. So that's what this little wiring is here. So do it all at the same time if you can. So to kind of give you an example here, if I put a test light into our red connector there, and if I push the brake down, you can see that's where we're getting power. So that's what we're looking to accomplish. Hopefully very, very soon there will be a custom fit kit that'll kind of just bolt in there and make it easy. But either way, you're going to have to roll with something like this, or if that custom kit's available, that will work as well. So now I went ahead, took our unit and plugged this into it, plugged the other end of the cable into that, and can't really mess these up. They only go in one way. And then to mount this, really not a ton of options. I got some quality two-sided sticky tape, put it on the back, and I'm going to go right here on top of this box inside of here. So when you do this, make sure that the the surface is clean. That way we'll get a good secure connection there. So this is how it looks whenever it's secured. When you're doing this, you want to make sure to avoid any moving parts or anything like that. Now we can get our panel drilled out to get our brake controller knob in place, and really not a ton of places to go with this here. There's just so much stuff in the way. So we're going to do it on our panel a little bit more towards the bottom. So that's really the only option. So I'm going to start with a small pilot hole. That drilled out, and then I'm going to change over to the larger size bit. That'll be the final size. The hole drilled out, we can then take this sticker that they give you and lay that in the 12 o'clock position with that, that cutout or that piece there facing up. We'll stick that on. You can take your switch, move it back out here, and then this plastic nut, and get this started. With these, be really gentle with them. Make sure they're threaded on good and started straight, because they're really easy to cross thread. So don't want that. So I get it about hand tight, and then I'll just come back with a socket or something and just barely give it a little bit more. With that set up and snug, you can dial the knob all the way, I guess it'd be counterclockwise or to the left. Then you can take the knob, and you want the 0, you can pop this on there with the 0 facing up towards that little pointer there, and that just pushes right on. Now what we can do is grab the wire coming out of our brake controller, connect it into the plug, and then reinstall our panel the opposite way that we removed it. So with this all put back together, it's a good idea to test our wiring and our brake controller. So for the brake controller and the wire, I just plugged into a test box, which is what I recommend doing, because if you use your trailer and it has any issues, might mislead you and think it's something we did on the Jeep side. But do what you can. For our brake controller though, I'm just going to dial it up, and we can see we have some lights going on it, so we got power. If I push the manual override down, we are getting power at the tester. And I want to mention with this too, you are going to have to calibrate it. So it's flashing blue and green. If you just drive around like normal, you don't even have to have your trailer hooked up, you know, and just make normal stops. After a minute, usually don't take long, this will turn to a solid color. And once it does that, you know you are calibrated. To check everything, we can go ahead and run through the signals and whatnot. So we'll turn on our left turn, our right turn, our tail lights. We can then hit our brakes. And while we hit the brakes, we can see we have a brake output, our brake light signal, and then in that top right corner we have our auxiliary power. So everything's going like it should. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Redarc Tow Pro Elite Trailer Brake Controller on our 2023 Jeep Wrangler 4xe.